Hey, what's up, guys? So I wanted to pop on here and answer a question. On my YouTube channel, somebody had asked a question about how to buy their first property, and they had a couple of questions like, what are some things that someone that's never bought a property should look out for? What are some things to pay attention to? Like, what are some key mistakes to avoid? That kind of stuff. So I'm actually going to look at the question here just to make sure I cover everything. What to avoid, what things that they should have, that kind of stuff. So it's interesting because I was doing a call yesterday with some of my real estate students, some of the mentees, and we were talking about buying your first property. And it was interesting because one of the students has actually owned property in the past. She owned a couple multifamily buildings and stuff, and she hated it, right? She said that it was a miserable experience, and she didn't want to do it again. And when her and I were talking before she signed up and whatnot, we were kind of talking about just how much different it is based on what she was doing versus what we're doing and what my students are doing and what we're teaching. And the biggest thing, and I want to start here because this idea is super important, and if you're going to get started buying real estate, if you don't understand this thing out of the gate, you could really mess up and really get yourself into a situation where you'll be one of those folks in a year from now that hate real estate and say they never should have did it and all the negative stuff, right? And that thing that I'm talking about is cash flow, right? Now, if you follow real estate blogs or podcasts or books, a lot of the things that you'll see or read online or in books and whatnot always tend to focus around cash flow, right? Like, cash flow is so important. Look for cash flow. Pay attention to cash flow. Now, I'm not saying that it's not important, right? But what I am saying is that it's not the first or even the second most important thing. In fact, if you look for deals and if the thing that you're focusing on with buying deals is cash flow, you're really going to mess yourself up, or you're going to get yourself into a bad situation, or you're going to wind up stuck in a property that is just sucking the life out of you for like $100 a month or $200 a month, right? And me and all of my students, I did not get into real estate to create a job for myself, right? And if I'm focusing on cash flow, then that's all I've done is create a job for myself. Instead, I want to talk to you about what you need to focus on instead and how that kind of factors into kind of a big picture. And I did a really, really deep dive yesterday. We spent probably almost 2 hours, a good hour and a half or so with some of the students yesterday, digging deep into this and analyzing deals and looking specifically at how this principle applies to deals and what it looks like on both ends and how tremendously different it is when you focus on the right thing. So, number one, the most important thing to focus on with real estate is appreciation. We do not buy deals for cash flow. Get that in your head. Now, again, that does not mean cash flow is important. Obviously, we don't want to buy a property or get into a situation where the property's cash flowing $1,000 a month and the mortgage is $1,500. We don't want to do that because then we're going to be paying $500 a month for the property. But I am not going to use cash flow to drive the ship, right? And this is where understanding your market, understanding rents, understanding what's happening in those individual markets really comes into play. And this is something that me and my students really dive deep into on a very micro level when it pertains to specific markets and when we're in the phase of analyzing where we should buy properties, where we shouldn't buy properties, why, and what all the other factors are that drive a market. But you want to be paying attention to appreciation because appreciation is what is going to make you wealthy. Now, let's look at a deal. Let's say that there's a property with an ARV of $200,000. And if you're not familiar with what the ARV, what that means, it's an extremely important acronym. It stands for After Repair Value. If you don't really know that or how to figure that out yet, maybe we could do another video or whatnot. But it's probably one of the first things that I start with getting my students to understand, not just what it means, but how to look at the market and look at a deal and understand what the ARV of that property is going to be. So ARV is super important. If you're watching and you're taking notes or whatnot, write that down. After repair value, ARV, super important. You'll hear it talked about a lot in real estate circles. So let's take a property with an ARV of $200,000, right? Let's say that we can buy that property for $100,000, right? We did this exact example with my students yesterday. Let's say that the renovations on that property are $35,000 and it cost me $5,000 to get into the deal, right? So I'm all in it for $140,000. Now, if I was buying that property strictly for cash flow, it's probably going to rent for like $1,500 or $1,600 a month. Mortgage is probably $1,200 or $1,300 a month. That property is probably going to make me $200 or $300 a month after reserves. I'm probably like maybe $200, $150, somewhere along those lines. That is not going to make you wealthy. It's not going to change your life, right? $150, $200 is nothing to write home about. You might as well keep your job, right? Especially for the problems that you may encounter with dealing with tenants and just the risk that's involved, right? If you're buying it for those reasons, you're going to get yourself really, really screwed. And then if the market shifts or things happen, it's going to be hard to justify holding on to that property. Now, let's take that same deal, and if we were analyzing that deal based on appreciation and we were buying that deal, because what we're looking for is appreciation, because we realize and recognize that appreciation is what is going to make us wealthy. Let's say that exact same property appreciated at a very conservative 5% a year. Lots of the markets where me and my students are buying in are seeing 10 and in some spots 21% appreciation. But again, those are unicorns, and we don't necessarily factor that or project based on those things. We just enjoy them while they're here. But we don't project based on that because we like to project very, very conservatively. So let's say at a 5% yearly appreciation, and let's say that we hold that property for 5 years. By year 5, that $200,000 property is worth about $256,000, give or take a few $100. At that point, if you bought the property properly, if you renovated it properly, if you put a tenant in there and that tenant was paying the rent, and you were potentially cash flowing a few $100, right? Which the cash flow portion only comes into play because it allows us to hold on to the property without having to spend our own money. So that tenant is paying us, we're paying the mortgage, and then there's a little bit of difference in between, a little bit of cash, which that's what they say cash flow is. But that money right there is not changing my life, right? Like, it's not even supporting my lifestyle by any means. And I'm not buying real estate for that. And I'm not teaching my students to buy real estate for that, right? What we're doing is we're focusing on the appreciation, because if we refinance that $200,000 house at 75% after we finished the rehab, our loan was $150, figuring a few other things and whatnot. Let's say at the end of 5 years we only owe about $130,000 on that property. Now it's worth $256. We'll say $255 to keep the math simple. Now I go back to the bank. We refinance that property at 80% loan to value. 80% loan to value is going to be like somewhere around $200,000, give or take a couple bucks, right? I only owe $130. After closing costs, I walk away with a check for about $65,000, right? $65,000 of money that is not being taxed by Uncle Sam. I won't get into tax strategies and benefits and whatnot on this video or whatnot, but it is something that we look at, and one of the big benefits, especially as an entrepreneur, if you're buying real estate. So we just walked away with a check for $65,000. Now let's just imagine that we did this 10 times over the last 5 years, right? Just 10 times. Super easy to do. My students are doing 2 to 3 deals in their first 6 months, right? 10 deals in 5 years you could do it sleeping almost, right? Once you learn and understand how to analyze, where to buy, how to leverage other people's money to buy, right? Super simple to do. So let's say you do this, right? In over a 5-year span, you've got 10 properties, you refinance them, and they're all things being equal. Let's just keep it simple and say they were all worth the same. All the parameters were the same. You refinance all those, you walk away with $650,000 of tax-free money. That'll change your life, right? That's enough money right there to do things with, right? To make moves. You can get yourself into lots of other larger investments, whether it's multifamily, whatever your goal could be, right? But I share this because what messes people up when they start buying properties is they're looking solely at the cash flow side of things. And what happens is usually when you're looking at cash flow, that forces you to look in cheap areas, right? Properties that are super cheap, where the mortgage is going to be low, and maybe you can rent it for significantly more than what the mortgage would be. But I have learned in doing real estate and doing dozens and dozens of deals and working with students on lots of deals is that real estate, when cheap, is usually cheap for a reason, which means other things, other factors that are at play are what's making that real estate cheap. It's not going to appreciate. It's going to be hard to raise rents. Usually there's not very many good jobs. There's not growth. People don't really want to live there. All of those things, right, that tend to drive real estate, right? Those things are not true. That's why the properties are cheap. So it is important. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about is That's probably the biggest mistake that I see people make when they start buying properties or when they're getting involved that aren't really sure what they're doing or what they're looking at is they're looking at the cash flow. How much money is this property going to cash flow? Don't do it. We don't buy properties for cash flow. Learn how to understand appreciation and how to buy properties for appreciation. Number two is the ARV. I talked about this in the beginning of the video, but I want to talk about the ARV, and understanding that is going to be the compass of the entire deal, right? Knowing how to figure out the ARV. And with my students, I walk them in depth through and we look at deal after deal after deal until they understand how to do this in almost any market in the country like the back of their hand. They know how to analyze. They know how to spit out what the ARV on that property is going to be. And then we look at it conservatively. So figuring out what the after repair value of that property is going to be is huge when you're looking at your first investment property. And I say when you're looking at your very first deal, to be super conservative. Let's say all your analysis, you know what you're doing, you know how to figure out the ARV. Let's say you're looking and you're thinking it's going to be $200,000. All right? I would probably come in and look at that deal and look at it at $180,000 ARV because I want to be conservative and I want to look at that deal in a very conservative light because I know if it works at 180, it's definitely going to work at 200. The last thing I want is to factor 200 as the ARV, and then we get done with the property and the appraisal comes back at 180 because now we're under, right? I would rather look at it as 180 and then we get done and the appraisal comes back and now the property's worth 200,000. That's a much better email to get from the lender, from the appraiser, from whoever telling you that it's worth significantly more. And to be honest, that's a situation that me and I have a student right now that's doing a deal, and we initially thought that he was going to be about $15,000 to the good when he was done with it, refinanced it, meaning that deal will have paid him $15,000 to buy it, fix it, put a tenant in, and then own it. None of his own money in the deal, $15,000 paid to him by the house. Turns out because we were super conservative and we did this the right way, he's actually looking at probably closer to about $25,000 profit on that deal, and he still owns the asset. So that's why these things are super important when you're looking at analyzing deals and getting involved in your first deal is understanding the ARV, focusing on appreciation, not cash flow. Again, I cannot stress that enough. The number of folks that I've seen get involved in real estate and focus on cash flow and then just either hate the process or find themselves in just bad situations with deals that really aren't good deals in the long term because they looked at cash flow, right? And so they bought in areas that maybe they cash flowed, $200, $300, $400, $500 maybe, but those properties aren't appreciating. They bought it for $100. Next year it's worth $101. Year 2 it's worth $101.5, and then year 3 it's worth $102.5. So you hold on to it and you're getting no upward growth because appreciation is what is going to make you wealthy. Appreciation is what is going to allow you to hold on to properties and for the magic to happen. Appreciation is what is going to turn real estate and rental properties into small banks for you. So those are the things that you want to focus on. So before I move on, I want to see anybody that's watching or catching this live, if you've got any questions, if you want to pop on anything about what I'm sharing, any questions, things along those lines. I want to make sure that I answered her question on the YouTube channel here. So she says, what properties to look into? It's kind of hard because I would need to know kind of what market you're looking at. Again, some of the biggest things that we're looking at, the drivers are, we definitely want to make sure that we're buying in areas that are fast appreciating and that are projected to appreciate well, areas that are popular, where things are happening, where building is going on, those types of things. And there's a lot more to the formula and kind of the minutia of this, and something that I really dive deep into on an individual basis with my students. But I think that gives you kind of some clear things to look at. To be honest, just avoiding the cash flow trap, right, will save you so much money and put you in such a significantly better position buying deals than if you're just looking at the cash flow side, because that's what will really mess you up. And when you're looking at cash flow, it's going to cause you to filter certain deals because of how much cash flow they can get, or areas because of cash flow. And you're going to wind up losing out. It's going to be a bad situation, and you'll be one of those folks with the nightmare stories about real estate, right? So with that, again, if there's any questions, we'll open up and see if anybody has any questions or whatnot. But when you're buying your property for the first time, I think, again, the most important thing is making sure that you're buying in the right area, right? A lot of folks, and we were talking about this yesterday with the students, a lot of folks naturally look where they live, right? So they start looking where they live. Well, you may or may not live in an area that makes sense to buy real estate in. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I personally live 3 hours from the area that I'm buying real estate in, and that just happens to be because I'm in Florida. And the truth is it's pretty hard. Good question, Lisa. I'm going to actually answer that really quickly. And that's because I live in Florida, and the truth is right now it's pretty hard to buy almost anywhere in Florida that's not a good area, just because of demand, people moving, things that happen with COVID or just driving people to Florida. But if I did not live in Florida, I would not automatically look where I live. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, because then it forces you to be constrained to a certain area and be forced to try to find deals in areas that maybe aren't good, maybe are good. And with this, it turns into, very often, folks don't know how to analyze a market. They don't know what things to look for in a market. And then they automatically just think, oh, I just need to buy close to home because it's going to be easier to do. Truth is, most of my students are investing 1,000 miles away from where they live, and it's a lot better for them, and it's going to create much better situations because it's going to force them, and I'm teaching them, and they're developing the skills to learn how to be very hands-off, how to build a team, how to build a team of realtors, brokers, lenders, contractors, other service providers that are going to allow them to not have to swing hammers and manage multiple tenants and deal with all of these different things that usually make people upset or disgruntled about real estate. It forces them to develop these skills so that it's very, very hands-off. So that's another mistake that folks make, is they automatically think to start looking and buying in areas where they live. And to answer your question, it is incredibly important, Lisa, to look to buy in landlord-friendly states. That was a question that came in on the comments there. Number one, because you're a landlord. So if you're ultimately going to buy and rent properties out, you definitely don't want to buy in areas where the rules, the laws, and the legislations are contrary to you or are not in your best interest. So, landlord-friendly states are super big and are super important, and they're going to benefit you in the long run. So, good question. So to get back kind of to that last point, and that is, don't be constrained when looking at areas or trying to buy properties to thinking I have to buy close to where I live, because it's a lot more valuable and advantageous for you to actually look further away. One of the biggest things that I've found is that when people are buying properties close to where they live or where they can just get in the car and drive there super quick, especially on your first deal, when you don't have experience, what's going to happen is when you see things, Lisa just said she's 2,000 miles away, and that's awesome, and you're developing skills to do that and manage it and be very, very hands-off. So that's awesome. When you're buying farther away from yourself, right, as opposed to buying close to home, because when you're close to home and you can just get in the car and drive over, maybe you got a deal, you're looking at its prospective deal, it's on 3rd Street, you live on 9th Street, you drive 6 blocks, you pull up. The first thing that's going to happen, especially in your first deal, is you're going to start noticing certain things about the property, right? And it's going to be a lot easier for you to talk yourself out of that deal, as opposed to the deal being 1,000 miles away, where you're going to be forced to have to depend on the numbers, the pictures, and you're not going to get in a situation where your emotions are going to influence you. What's going to influence and drive you is your analysis, the data, the numbers, the deal structure, all of the important things, and you're not going to get caught up in emotions or in your head or talking yourself out. And it's super important, and is what has allowed my students to continue moving forward doing deals, because there's no emotion involved. It is strictly formulaic, and it is strictly numbers, and that is what we're looking at. We're looking at deals, markets, analysis, data, research, and numbers, and that is what is driving our decision. So that's probably those are probably the 3 biggest things. If you're new to buying properties, never bought an investment property, I'll recap real quick before we hop off. Number 1, do not focus on cash flow. Learn and understand what appreciation means, how it benefits you, and how it applies to the specific area that you're looking at properties in. Number 2, the ARV, or after repair value. know it, understand it, understand how to calculate the ARV for the market that you're buying in, and make sure that you're doing it very, very conservatively, because you don't want to get caught, especially if you haven't done deals in a specific area or you're new to investing. Make sure that your ARV numbers are super conservative and that the deal still works at conservative numbers. It'll save you a ton, and it'll create a much better experience on the back end if things come in higher for you than if you weren't conservative and they came in lower, I can assure you. Number 3, do not get caught trying and focusing and thinking that you have to buy properties that are close to you. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't buy properties that are close to you, but don't automatically think you need to buy properties close to you simply because it's easier to go, to see, to look at, to get there, because we live in the year 2022 and it's super easy. There's so many tools, technology, resources, and methods that you can do to be able to see, analyze, and look at properties across the country without ever having to fly there, go there, or walk the property. So don't get caught up in your head thinking that you have to buy super close to home or whatnot. I actually advise against doing that, and I find that it's a lot better for first-time buyers, newer investors, people building a portfolio to push themselves outside of that comfort zone. So we'll recap there. So again, I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. I'm going to be dropping a lot more. If you have any questions or some things that you want me to cover on a video, you can post it in the comments or drop a comment on YouTube in the videos or whatnot. And I'll make sure that I start doing videos where I answer questions and kind of focus around some specific topics. And definitely try to get everybody's questions answered and help you guys move forward with investing. So again, remember this. If you only get one thing out of this video, appreciation over cash flow. Now y'all go build some wealth.